Thanks so much how are you enjoying the morning? Good? Yes, general nodding Christian approval, that's great. And this afternoon, we're going into the future with my illustrious panel of friends and confidants. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's James Poulter. I am the lesser impressive half of my wife, Holly Poulter, who's been running this thing. Maybe give her a hand. Thanks. And up until recently, I was head of emerging platforms at Lego, the toy company that makes lots of bits of plastic, puts them in small boxes and sells them to children. And amongst other things that I've been doing, I host the Signal podcast, for which you heard the music. Those of you who've heard the show, just maybe give me a whoop or a wave. Okay, that whoop could have been bigger. We'll work on that. And the way that we can work on that is that if you have an Apple device in your possession, some of you do. Yes, those Android defectors can be punished at the back. Well, those of you who've got one, maybe if you've got the show in your thing, maybe we have that slide back at some point or other. Go to Apple Podcasts, download the show, leave 5 stars. It's good, so just leave 5 stars. Trust me on that. And it will really help us get the show out to more people. It's one of the main things that the church, at the Church and Media Conference produces on behalf of Christians in the media, and it really helps us get this message to try and connect people out there with the idea of faith in media. So that's my plugs done for now. So to turn to our illustrious panel, just to re-welcome the team, Liz Clutterbuck, CV clergy and digital thinker in my mind. We have Mukul Devichand, who is the head of Voice Plus AI at the BBC. He'll explain why that's important. It's plus, not an ampersand later on. And Adrian Harris, who is the head of digital at the Church of England. Welcome to all three of you. Now, one of the things that I know that Mukul will share with you is a little bit about what they've been doing in the voice area as well. And you're going to hear probably from a couple of folks and also in the discussion a lot around this area of voice, because it's becoming one of the most important topics in the kind of future digital tech scene at the moment, particularly as these devices go into more and more households. We see in the UK that it's around about 1 in 6 households in the UK now have some kind of smart device or smart speaker. It's 1 in 4 already in the US, and that's the fastest technology adoption of any consumer tech that's ever happened, faster than the smartphone, smartwatch, and every other smart thing that came before it. But we also know that these things aren't actually all that smart very often. They are often not very, they're very artificial and not very intelligent often as well. And so one of the things that Mukul and the team at the BBC have been working on is to try and explore new ways of bringing public service broadcasting through these new mediums, and so I'll invite him to share a little bit about what they're up to now.
Good. Thank you very much. I'm not going to stand up, if that's all right. So I don't have much to say, but what I am going to do is the risky thing of trying to demo something live using an Alexa device, so please wish me luck. I'm a bit nervous. People. So just very briefly, as James was saying, so I have one of these kind of sort of BBC-ish job titles. I'm the exec editor of Voice Plus AI at the BBC. What does it kind of mean? I suppose if I start with voice, I think everyone knows what I mean when I say voice. I don't just mean the human voice. But I mean, can I ask how many people here are amongst that large population that now have a smart speaker? Do any of you guys have a smart speaker? So that's interesting. Probably less than the national proportion, but about the national proportion. So maybe it just helps if I just sort of say what I think I do for a living, and then I can explain what I can do the live demo. So I've been at the BBC a long time. I'm a journalist by background, and say in the last 5 years got into the business of understanding both how we should report better on the digital world. So I ran something called BBC Trending, which reports on the social web, but also how we can better engage with these new forms of information and new forms of media that are really quite disruptive technologies. That's my background, and as of late, I've got this job as the exec editor of Voice Plus AI, which means that I jointly run a bit of a project about thinking about what the BBC should do in this space. So I jointly run it with a head of product, so who's a tech guy, and I come from the editorial side, and we're together having a little bit of a think about what the BBC should be doing, and we're actually doing some stuff. So I'm going to quickly demo you. I think rather than me talk a lot about what I do, I will just demo you some stuff. Where is the Alexa? Is there an Alexa here?
She's plugged in down here.
All right, there we go.
I say she, we can get into the debate about whether or not we should do that later.
Yeah, I'll just tell you about 2 things that we have launched over the last year or so. So one is, in terms of what we're doing on voice, A lot of what we're doing, probably the majority of what we're doing, is just making sure that the content that you all pay for is accessible in voice. Since, as James was saying, a large proportion of people now have these devices. So that, for example, has involved an Alexa skill, which allows me to say things like, Alexa, Radio 1.
Here's Radio 1.
The BBC.
So, Alexa, stop.
Alexa, stop.
Yeah, you get a lot of that. Perhaps you'll. Perhaps I should have. I'll say it again. Perhaps I should have picked a sort of a slightly more reflective radio station, Radio 3. But so that is just very simple. It's just a skill, which is what they call an app on Alexa to play our stations and our podcasts. But that's the start. It's the start of engaging this technology and making sure that the audiences have what we make ready for them. And as well as that, we're also having a little bit of a think about what the future could hold, very much in an experimental way at the moment, and not sort of at scale, as it were. But we think it's an interesting new technology. We're keeping an eye on how it goes, and there's lots of potential which we can talk about and a lot of things to think about. One of the things is how could we use it to create stuff for audiences that serve public service. So an example of that, I think, would be, Alexa, open CBeebies.
The BBC.
Let's listen and find out who's here to play.
Hi, I'm Andy. The Go-Jetters.
Who do you want to play with?
Liz, who would you like?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Who would you like to play with?
Oh, Go-Jetters.
Oops, I still don't understand.
for you.
Would you like to meet more friends?
I'll do it
Or
over
would
here.
you like a surprise?
Go Jetters.
Hi, Go-Jet cadets. Foz here, and I'm going to help you train to become a Go-Jetter. Here at the Go-Jet Academy, studying hard plus having fun equals
Alexa,
great training.
stop.
So,
Alexa.
let's take Ubical
No.
Alexa.
Funky Back.
Stop.
So look,
Time for this Go-Jetter to go. Hope to see you again soon, Go-Jet cadet.
look, I won't inflict the whole thing on you, but that is just an experimental piece, really. But it's what we're trying to do there is test a number of different types of play patterns using this technology, and just kind of work out, you know, as I say, in a fairly limited way at the moment. But would children want to spend time talking to a speaker? If they do, what kinds of things would they want to say, and how interactive should they be? Do they want a story and then just to listen to it? Do they want to talk a lot to it? Is it more like a game? We have a quiz in there. So we're trying to understand a bit about what sorts of creativity this new platform, which is growing fast, enables. And obviously, we are the BBC, so I think we're going to talk a bit about, you know, what institutions like the church or the BBC should be doing in this technology space. And I think for us, it is public service. You know, we're a public service broadcaster, and that seemed like an interesting place to start with some intuitions about how we might be able to do some things for our younger audiences in this space. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thanks to Mukul. And yes, absolutely, I applaud that. Live demos are always dangerous and nerve-wracking. Liz, you have been a long-time advocate for kind of the digital world, particularly with a faith perspective, sharing in all different manners of ways through blogging, very early in Twitter, and have represented the church on a number of occasions to talk about this subject. What have you been working on recently, and what are you excited about? Are you worried about being interrupted by an AI assistant constantly in the future?
Yeah, I think this makes some interesting thinking about AI and the church. But yeah, it's interesting. When I was thinking about the technology stuff, I actually started by looking backwards, which is the opposite of what you've entitled this session, so sorry about that. But one of the great things about what Adrian and his team have been doing over the last couple of years is that finally there feels like there's somebody in the institution of the Church of England doing what a lot of us have been doing informally in the church ever since social media and tech started to sort of take off. And I was thinking about some of the ways in which we have been changed by that. And the biggest example for me in terms of tech was the decision to create an app for the Common Worship Daily Prayer liturgy. Those of you who aren't Anglican may not be aware that if you had wanted to do daily prayer, say 10 years ago, you'd have been handed a book with very confusing coloured bookmarks, and then you'd have needed to look up somewhere else what the day's readings were and found a Bible, and it involved a lot of complicated things. It was very inaccessible for people coming in off the street. Now you can carry it around in your phone, and there are thousands and thousands of people all over the world who are now using the Church of England daily office on the tube, on their way into work, on their way home. And it's made accessible something that previously was kind of done by clergy in an empty church to sort of, maybe one other person and probably a few mice. And I think that if you had said to somebody 10 years ago, do you know what? Thanks to technology, in a few years' time, anybody who wants to can do daily prayer wherever they are, but all use the same liturgy and the same readings. I think they'd have been quite surprised. And so that, spiritually and as an institution, that is quite an exciting development, which I think we need to be, we need to really celebrate. It's one of my favourite things that Church of England done over the last few years. So when I look at things like the Alexa skill, it's really interesting to think about what might happen over the next couple of years as far as that's concerned. I've got to say, when I turned up for the launch of the Alexa skill, it was a closed launch. We didn't know what they were going to announce. And so I get invitations from Church of England every so often saying, come to this thing. And I thought, well, it's local, there will be wine, there'll be good people.
All the good reasons to attend.
I'll go to this. And when it was announced that it was Alexa, I genuinely was quite bowled over because I hadn't even thought to myself, oh yeah, the Church of England should do something with Alexa. There were plenty of other things I'd thought, not even technologically wise, I'd quite like the Church of England to sort out. But Alexa wasn't really up there. And what was amazing was the reception it got when I started to talk to people in the church, outside the church about this. I did an interview with the BBC that week to talk about it, and every person I met in the production crew said, oh, why is the church doing Alexa? And I was like, well, you can put all sorts of prayers on there, and it's a way of accessing information. They're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And it does. I mean, that's the thing, with so many people having them in the home, on the one hand, somebody in my congregation who I knew had an Alexa because their kids add stuff to their supermarket order through it. I said, there's now a Church of England thing. You could get the kids to get Alexa to say grace. And this has become like a huge thing for them because they didn't really like to say grace, or they didn't know how to do it. And all of a sudden, there was a novelty about getting Alexa to do it. And outside of the church, Adrian mentioned the finding churches information via Alexa. I mean, the thing for me that is, I guess, as a parish priest, it's great that there's another way of people finding information. But the other thing for me with Alexa having prayers is that quite often people will approach known Christians to you. If you're wearing the dog collar and people know that you're a Christian, and ask you to pray. And that's great, and I love doing that. But people often don't realize that they can find the words themselves. And so the fact that Alexa can say grace or a morning prayer or a daily prayer, it gives permission to people to have that prayer in their space. And it gives them words that they didn't previously know. And I think starts, hopefully, a journey that, might lead them to their local church, but might just lead them into a space where they feel able to pray. And the great thing about grace, personally, is whenever I go to something, people always go, oh, you're a vicar, you should say grace. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, anybody can do it, and if they have an Alexa, we can get Alexa to do it.
Hand it off to them. Good. Excellent. Well, glad to see that it's enabling you to get out of having to do press. So we're going to move forward and talk a little bit about what's the future look like and what are we excited about. Mukul, as you look into the next 12 months, obviously we're talking a lot about voice, but broader than that as well, technology is intersecting every part of our daily experience of life. What are you most excited about, particularly when it comes to communicating in the next year or so ahead of you? Where are the areas that your focus is, and what are you most excited about?
So personally, my focus is definitely on voice, because that's my job. But I think, I suppose what I'm excited about is both, I mean, you might expect me to say I'm excited about not just voice, but I am excited about voice, but the attendant kind of AI technologies underneath it. And that's a bit of a misdescription, okay? As a journalist, it does annoy me when people use terms incorrectly, and when we say, oh, there's AI everywhere, in fact, only a certain part of the kind of technology stack in voice interfaces is truly what you would call AI. But a significant part of that stack is very similar to other technologies like social media and that we've seen on mobiles, which is sort of algorithmic and personalized content serving. And that is really, it's really come in a big way into all of our lives in lots and lots of different ways, in lots and lots of different interfaces, not just on social media, but it's increasingly in our televisions, and it's in voice interfaces and so forth and so on. And that is exciting, but I'm also excited about hopefully a better conversation in institutions and in society about that. Because there have been also sort of significant things to worry about in the big shifts that we've seen in how information and media have kind of responded to these technologies. And I think we are beginning to see a better, more responsible conversation around things like news and children's and those things. And I think that's really exciting for me working at the BBC. And it's great to be here and see the church talking about, people from the church talking about these sorts of things as well. Because we have to have a real think about what these technologies are and how we can use them in a creative way, and how we should also be aware of what they can do.
Yeah, and we've seen, just to kind of bring in both Adrian and yourself on that thought, that these algorithms are, we've seen in many cases, particularly in the light of the past 12 months or so with Facebook and others, confirmation bias is becoming a problem, right? The more of these things that we see, the more things that we like and comment and click on, they just end up feeding us more of the same, and it can be hard to kind of break out of those cycles. So, Adrian, perhaps with your experience of kind of trying to grow the social media presence in particular of the Church of England, how are you getting in those feeds? How are you breaking into kind of people's daily experience of their social media?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that we're really working on, and it goes back to our audiences, is social media advertising, but very focused advertising, to be able to speak into groups of people who are perhaps open, exploring faith, I suppose to remind them that there's a church near them. We're the national church, and I suppose more widely, my thing about over the next 12 months, what I think there's a big opportunity with. We've started to see now, as we put things like a church near you at the heart of our strategy, that there is a huge opportunity to bring people into community, and never has that been more necessary. And I think when you look at what's happening on high streets across the country, when you look at one of the reasons I came to do this job, the Christian faith, I don't think has ever been more relevant than it is now, and the opportunity that the church has with 16,500 churches in this country, but also through the church halls, the parent and toddler groups, the coffee mornings, almost turning resources like a church near you into a community near you. I think there is just huge potential, and I think for us over the next year, it's working out with things like Alexa, but through all that we do, that we try and bring people into community, because it's never been more necessary.
Liz, you find yourself at the kind of front of the community quite often, either stood in front of them in places like this, preaching and teaching, or out in the community doing work. How do you see that social media and technology is enabling you to do that job better, and how is that going to change as well?
Well, it really helps. So I've recently taken up an appointment at a church in North London, which looks nothing like this amazing building. Most people don't realise that it's a church. It does have a huge cross outside it, but it doesn't face the road. It's a 1980s build. And actually, the biggest issue we have is people knowing that we're there. And one of the things I've realised over the last few years is that actually people don't walk around their communities in the same way that they might have done once upon a time. In London, they might know the route to the tube station and, you know, the local shop, but not necessarily go off the main road. And so what we're finding is that a lot of people who are trying out activities or coming to services are doing so as a result of having searched online. And so for me, I think one of the things, you know, Alexa helps. The idea of having things like a church near you, which are in places where people are going to go, or people that, you know, items of technology that people have, is really great. But there needs to be more of that. So for me, it's things like building a hyper-local presence on Twitter, following things in the local community. It's about making sure that you're using all the channels that you can to get information about your church community out there on the activities that you offer, not just the spiritual ones, but the practical ones, you know, like food banks and stay and play facilities, all those kind of things. And I think, you know, as a priest, the thing for me is that anything that makes my job a little bit easier is really welcome. So a church near you is a really great resource because that's often the first thing I give people to check whether this is the right church for them to get married in. Because it's all done on which parish you live in, or, you know, whether their baby can be baptized there. I think one of the things looking ahead, you know, maybe not next year, but maybe the year after, is as this AI technology continues to develop, you know, the facilities of things like chatbots. You know, if my website, my church website or Facebook page can answer really simple questions that save an email being answered or a phone being answered, you know, if something like, what time is your Sunday service? You know, a bot can answer that. That's fairly straightforward. I wouldn't want bots starting to do things like, you know, theologically, is it okay to marry after divorce? Any of those kind of like pastoral things, that's not a place for AI to get involved. But practical things, you know, where simple questions can be asked and answered, I think would be a really good initiative.
I'm going to open it up to the floor in just one moment after this next question, so if you've got questions, begin to think of them. Please keep them short. We want questions, not sermons. Right, and so the last question I really want to ask all three of you is that we touched a little bit upon artificial intelligence there, and as I said in the introduction, a lot of it is quite artificial, and it doesn't feel very intelligent, but it's going in that direction. And you know, I'm a big believer in the next 5 years or so, we're at the point where we will have algorithms that can generate worship music. We will have algorithms that can generate sermons based on a verse in the Bible. And is it okay to sit under the preaching and teaching and singing of these things? That's something we're going to have to wrestle with. So as you guys look towards the kind of AI future and as it becomes less artificial but more general, where do you see opportunities for, you know, communication, for media, and also for the faith? And where do you see the biggest challenges? Maybe Adrian, you want to start us in that area?
Thank you. Yeah. I think it's a term that's bandied around, artificial intelligence, and I still don't think we quite know what it means. I mean, Alexa is a great platform for us to be able to share audio, but we're using that same audio content in our apps this Christmas. It's already embedded into our website, so the daily prayer you get on the website is the same that feeds Alexa as feeds other stuff that we're working on at the moment. So, yeah, I think there's, can you remind me of the question?
Well, just where do you see the biggest opportunity for this kind of AI future? Do you actually even see it coming anytime soon?
I think, I completely agree with Liz that there's a role for it to play in introducing the Christian faith, in confidence building, but that is one of the many joys of the Church of England, that everyone in this room who lives in England is in a parish. And I think that's where it can only go so far, and should only go so far, because that's the joy of coming into community and gathering as the body of Christ.
Mukul, what about you?
I've got to share with you this very amusing term that I heard today. So somebody said that I didn't coin this one, but with artificial intelligence has come an artificial intelligentsia who like to talk about it. So I hope that's not all of us.
I was going to say, I hope I discount myself from that crowd.
But I think, I think we're very much at the beginning, well, not even at the beginning, because I think this has begun a little while ago, but it's sort of accelerating. This technology, we shouldn't overstate what it can do, but it is also a really exciting kind of possibility. The kind of technology around machine learning enables all sorts of things to happen at pace. It's an exciting industry for the UK and for parts of the whole world really is trying to get into it. So what I'm looking forward to is I think it is exciting. I don't think we should fear this future because I work in it, but I think it's really good for us to just approach it. I mean, artificial intelligence, is not artificial general intelligence, which is this kind of sci-fi prospect. Experts are divided as to whether that even will ever exist, but I don't think we have to worry about that right now. Right now, it's a sophisticated form of kind of being able to generate new applications that are really exciting. Some of them involve communication. Some of them involve easier communication. Alexa or Google Home or any kind of voice assistant is a really interesting but not the only example of that. And I think as public institutions, the BBC, we've spoken about the church, but all institutions, I think it's, we should feel like the risk would be that we see this as a bit of a threat and we kind of throw things into it in a kind of a not very thought out way. It's really interesting to hear the church talking about this stuff because actually, we should be seeing it as something that we can apply our first principles to. So in our case at the BBC, our first principles are about public broadcasting and things like a shared basis of facts in society, a national conversation, and all the things that, that public broadcasting exists to do. And if you start from there, it's very exciting to think about how we can use this sort of technology. And so I'm looking forward to that intensifying, really.
Fantastic. Liz, and then get you ready with your questions.
So I am categorically against AI sermons.
Okay, good.
I want my job to be a little bit easier, and I enjoy writing a sermon. That leads us into some very interesting ethical areas. I think, like Adrian was saying, there's a lot of ways in which it can help us, but I think there is also a place for us to watch and keep check. One of the things that has risen up alongside the growth in smart speakers and smartphones is our fears about how our data is being used and what the devices in our pocket and in our homes can also do. And so I think that, in the church, that's something we really need to be very mindful of. And I'd be very wary of the church going into territory where it's basically data mining to inform further decisions that are a bit creepy. You were mentioning over lunch this idea of being able to see people's responses to certain songs or like mining somebody's Spotify account to what they're playing at certain times. That kind of thing makes me quite uncomfortable because what that is doing is taking out the role of the Holy Spirit. And I think theologically for me, the reason I've got into social media and tech as being a really important part of my ministry was because it was just augmenting what was already happening. And I think when we start using data to almost manipulate, I think then we're getting into really dangerous territory.
Very interesting. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to open it up to the floor if we've got some questions. Brian, I thought you might be there, so that's good. We've got a question down here at the front. Stick your hands up if you've got questions. We'll come to you in a moment. Try and keep them snappy so we can get to as many as we can in the next few minutes.
Something that's often missing from conversations about AI is the actual massive positive impact it has on people with disabilities. How having a device like that can really transform someone's experience if they're stuck at home or whatever. I just wondered if you wanted to say something about that, because I think sort of social media and AI together can really help people that maybe can't bring themselves to walk through the door of a church on a Sunday morning, but gives them the opportunity to engage with God from their own home, if they might be struggling with mental health or they might have another disability. So I just wondered if you'd like to sort of share how you see AI kind of supporting people with disabilities and how we can be more inclusive with what we do.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's something I jotted down that I hadn't mentioned, that after Lent we did some research with people who took part in our Lent journey this year, And that was something that came through really clearly. And actually, as a result of launching the skill as well, we've had feedback from people who can't get to church for all sorts of reasons, where just to be able to say the morning prayer and know that thousands of people across the country are saying it's one of the sort of most moving parts of the job that I do, really, to play a tiny part in helping to connect someone in their Christian relationship and to make something available. And we've heard of people who have bought these devices for family and friends, and it's opened up the whole sort of world for them in a way that just wasn't there before, and that's a wonderful thing to play a small part in.
Adrian, just to challenge that question, I think it's coming from an intentionally good place, but how much should we worry that perhaps AI and some of these automated systems can also kind of take away the responsibility of local congregations to care for those that couldn't otherwise get out into the community? Does it somehow augment their burden in some way? Is that something you guys would be concerned about?
I mean, it's not anything that we've seen. We've seen it in its most positive way, which is to supplement, where we've had people say, I know someone in the congregation, we visit her every week. It's really lovely that we bought her this or she's bought that, and it's enabled X, Y, and Z. So, I would not want.
No.
So I think it's wonderful as it supplements.
Liz, what about you?
I completely agree with what Adrian's saying, because I think what that technology does is, again, it's about augmenting what is already there. And theologically, this argument goes round and round, and there are people who would disagree with my view on this. But, for example, Holy Communion Alexa can't do that. And so, as a parish priest,
kind of lacking the hands. Yeah.
Lacking the hands, lacking so many things.
This is where she's the theologian and I'm not, you see.
But, for me, as one of my roles is to take communion to those who want it, who are housebound. And that is something that the church should always be. The sacrament cannot be devolved to a device.
Excellent.
This is great discussion, and I don't want to disrupt it in any way. I'm really encouraged by what you say. As an old man, I remember sitting at a similar conference talking about television, and if there was a communion service going on TV and the door was open and there was a bakery behind the door, whether that be consecrated bread because it was being consecrated. So it's great that things are moving on, and I think you're doing really exciting work. What encourages me particularly is hearing you talk about some of the fears, the problems, and the worries. And I think it's really important to underline that in the mix, we need to continually look at the theology, to continually question what we're doing. So I'll just throw in one fact that you probably know already, some research from the University of Milwaukee, religious department, where this guy made up tweets electronically from sermons and just sent them out, and it was gibberish. And within 20 minutes, bots from all over the world were liking them, retweeting them, and saying this is great and spiritual. And what was more interesting was that real people started following it and saying this is great, it's made my day. It's a warning to all of us.
The bots question came up earlier. You mentioned that there are good roles for bots and there are other ones. Do you always want to know when you're talking to a bot? How often are you worried about that?
Yes, I definitely want to know if I'm talking to a bot. Yeah, but I think the Twitter one is particularly interesting because bot can get bandied around as an insult on Twitter for an account that is not engaging. So if it's just broadcasting, if it's only tweeting stuff out, and it may get retweeted, whatever, but if that account is not then engaging with the replies it gets, it is a bot. And it's very interesting because there are, real life accounts we know aren't bots that still do that. But I would say that's an example of not very good practice of social media, that it's about relationship rather than just broadcasting.
Look, how are you guys dealing with that at the BBC, particularly with the need to get so much news out and automate so much versus the kind of authenticity and the role of the individual contributor, whether that is an individual broadcaster or a personality? How are the BBC thinking about the balance between some of this automation versus putting the onus on individual journalists?
Sure. Well, I'm hoping, I don't think there's any threat of kind of AI becoming the journalist being kind of AI bots at this point. But I think, in my last job, editing something called BBC Trending, we were looking at the social web and really reporting on it. And it's interesting when you look at the social web through a journalistic lens, And those early, what started with kind of bots and fake trends, which we were kind of reporting on, calling out in the early days, before such things were kind of, when most people didn't realize that such and such was a bot. And moving on to things like disinformation, which we've seen, and orchestrated campaigns of disinformation. I think, technology has changed, but journalistic standards and values and the BBC's producer guidelines are slightly timeless principles. And if you see, we constantly update them, but the core principles of editorial awareness, I think, are real great aids in this. So both in stuff that we make, we already think very carefully about editorial standards of, you have to think about making sure that you've conveyed the truth, and not just in an impartial way, but in a kind of a way that wasn't misleading. You can't mislead audiences, you shouldn't mislead audiences. Think a lot about it. And those principles, when applied to either what we make in a digital sphere or understanding how we report on the digital sphere, are quite useful guides. So I think, we already have good sets of ideas with which to judge these things. We just need to make sure we apply them with the same rigor that we always have.
Excellent. Any other questions that we've got? Sheridan at the back there.
Couple of questions. Number one, Facebook have just had a huge data breach. Are you guys in any way concerned about that and the amount of information that we're giving to Alexa as we're doing that? That's the first question. Number two, fascinated by this whole area. Can you just give us a crash course in how you create an Alexa skill?
Very good. Let's just take the data question first, and Adrian, and this is something that we've even been speaking about recently around data, the role of data and the importance of it and keeping that secure. How are you guys thinking about the use of data? What the role of data in the church could and should be?
Yeah, so from an email point of view, it's actually been very straightforward, because the Church of England didn't actually start capturing email addresses for campaigns until December last year. So GDPR has been quite straightforward for us, because
it's been that easy for all of you, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So we just future-proofed everything ahead of the changes this year. On the point about Facebook, I think it's an absolutely, it's something we talk about a lot as a team, and about any social network, and really it's judging the appropriateness of an institution being on it or not, and I think it's just an ongoing discussion, really. I don't have, the things that happen on it are obviously concerning, but it's something we talk about a lot as a team.
Anything to add, Mukul?
On how to make an Alexa skill, I think I'm in a very illustrious company here, but I'd say it's interesting. It's an interesting. What is interesting about it when you get into it is that it's a bit of a new platform, and not just Alexa. All of the voice platforms, obviously, we're looking at all of them, and it's at an early stage, and that makes it both exciting, but not necessarily. It just feels like we're at the beginning of something that's going to get ever more sophisticated. Right now, the constraints around the technology are much more than you might imagine when you first start working in this space. So, for example, clips of audio have to be very short and at a very low bit rate. As a person that spent sort of 15 years in broadcasting, slightly breaks my heart to hear audio at that bit rate. But you have to. That is a legitimate constraint of the technology. Because of the way that it works. So it's kind of interesting. It's a new area, and I feel like, as I say, an illustrious company, because we talk a lot about sort of how to hack this technology. But I think I'd say have a go, because it's still up. There's no killer app yet in voice. We don't really know how to use it to the best of its abilities. It's very much like day one. And that makes it both kind of hard but also exciting.
We have time for one last question. It's one down here at the front, because you got there first.
Cheers, thanks. Yeah, really like the presentation and the work which is being done, which I thought was fantastic. I think for me, one of the challenges is around, there's all of these powerful tools that are around right now, and it's about how do we make sure there's the element of quality within the content that's provided to match the power in which that can be delivered. And in some ways, my question really is what do you see as the keys to help ensure that it's not a case of this is what the church is saying, but we're more helping people to integrate Christ into their daily lives, into their daily walk. So we're helping them to share those stories and really understanding the diversity and the reality that's happening, rather than being distant and just trying to take all of the content we have already and pushing it down these fantastic channels. Is there kind of what you see kind of the keys to making sure that it becomes part of that kind of daily walk is something that's really being encouraged?
Liz, maybe talk to us a bit about how you talking to people that you interact with day to day, and particularly your congregations, about integrating technology and digital into their walk of faith.
Yeah, so I think this comes back to what I was saying about augmentation. I think I would be a bit concerned if somebody who, confessed being a practicing Christian, actually all of their practice amounted to listening to Alexa tell them prayers. The interesting thing, I don't think Adrian mentioned this earlier, is that all of the prayers that Alexa says at the moment on the skill are said by somebody and they are prayed. But even then, if that was the extent of their practice, I would be a bit concerned. So I think for me, it's about showing people where this might improve things for them or help them think about their faith in a different way. And I know that one of the things people most often talk to me about is not having the time to make space for God in their daily life. And so one of the things, over the last few years I've been keeping a list of is different things that work for different people, because, nobody uses exactly the same spiritual practice as the next person. And so for me, it's saying, well, do you know what, do you have space on the tube to get your phone out and to read the liturgy for, 10 minutes? Are you a busy parent who, if you set an alarm at 12 o'clock to, get Alexa to say the prayer for the day, is that something that's going to be able to work for you? So it's not saying that this is the only thing to use. It's working out what its role is in, on the one hand, the day-to-day life of a, already practicing Christian, but also how does it kickstart something for somebody who is on the edge of the church or hasn't been in church, ever.
Excellent. Well, we are out of time, so we'll have to close there, but the guys will be around for a couple of questions afterwards as well. I think even Adrian got a couple of feature requests there for the next version of the Alexa skill, so I think we're all sorted of that. Will you please put your hands together and thank Adrian, Mukul and Liz for this great panel.